Hey everyone, in this video let's see how we can extract the content of our measures in a given tabular model by either using DAX Studio or Tabular Editor. So the easiest method will be to use the DAX Studio because in that you can simply use a DMV and then extract the data in a Excel file or a text file. But in case of Tabular Editor we will have to write a C# script. So let's get started. So let's begin by going to the external tools option and then let's click on DAX Studio. That will launch the DAX Studio application. And what we can do is simply expand the metadata pane, and in that you will find this DMV option. Simply click on that, and in the search bar simply write measure, and then you will find something written as MD schema measures. So simply select that and drag and drop it on the right hand side, and if you click on F5, or you can either press the run button as well. So if I press F5, you can see that in the results pane I get something which is the content of my measure, all the measures in my model, as well as several extra details that we are not interested in. So you can see that we have catalog name, schema name, cube name, measure name. That is something we can keep. Then we have the measure caption as well, and towards the right you will find something as expression. So we are only interested in the measure name column and the expression column. So let's extract this information in either Excel file or a text file. And before that, what we can do is simply limit the number of columns that we are actually extracting out of this results pane. So in order to remove additional columns from the results, what we can do is simply edit this DMV expression by removing the asterisk mark and explicitly listing out the name of the columns that we want to keep. So I definitely want to keep the measure name, so I can write measure underscore name, and then I also want to keep the expression column, so I can write expression. And if I press F5 or hit the run button, you can see that now I only get two columns, which are measure name and the expression, and now I can extract the metadata of these two columns in either a text file or an Excel file. And to do that, what I can do is simply go to the home page and then click on the output, and then I can simply select the Excel static option. So let's click on that, and if I press the run option once again, you will notice that it gives me a dialog box which is asking me to save the file. So I can save it something like 123 on my desktop, and if I click on save, the query has been completed. And if I go to the desktop, you can see that I have my 123 file, and if I open that, let's wait for it to open, you can see that I get a nicely formatted table which contains the name of the measure as well as the DAX expression, and then I can filter the content of the table. So let's say I want to select this one, and if I click on OK, I get the measure and the DAX expression. So let's go back to DAX Studio so that we can try the text file version as well. So let's click on output and then choose the file option, and if I click on run once again, you can see that it again gives me a dialog box with a save as type of .csv. So then I can write something like ABC, and if I click on save, and let's go back to desktop, and then I can open the ABC file. Let's wait for it to open, and then again you can see that this time there is no formatted table because CSV file cannot contain that kind of formatting that we have seen in Excel, but at least you still get the content of those two columns that we have seen in the DAX Studio. So let's say you want to only extract the content of a measure from a given table and not from all the table in your data model. What you can do is simply go back to DAX Studio, and for a moment I'm going to cut the expression that I've already written, and instead of that I'm going to write asterisk and then press F5 just to simply get the column names. So let's click on cancel and then choose the option of grid, and if I hit run again, you can see that I get all the columns once again. And what I can do is simply search the table name from here, which is the measure group name, and here I can write a DAX expression, sorry, a SQL expression, which is where the measure group name is equal to dates. And if I press F5, I get an error. Sorry, I need to write single quote and not the double quotes. And if I press F5, you can see that I still get my result, but this time it only contains two measures because in my dates table I only have two measures. And if I go back to Power BI file for a moment, you can see that in my dates table I only have two measures, which are year over year sales and the running total sales for 2007. So by using the where clause, you can extract the measures from a given table, and then you can simply use either file option or the Excel option to extract them into the text file or an Excel file respectively. And that was all for how you can extract the content of a measure with the help of DAX Studio. Now let's see how we can do the same operation by using Tabular Writer. And I'm going to use Tabular Writer 2, but you can also follow along by using Tabular Writer 3. I'm only using Tabular Writer 2 because it is a free open source tool. So I'm assuming that all of you who are following this video will already have that installed on your system. And in case if you do not already have it, you can simply go and download it from the GitHub so that you do not have to purchase a paid application such as Tabular Writer 3. So let's click on Tabular Editor 2 so that we can launch it, and let's click on OK and maximize it. And I'm going to rearrange things a little bit so that I can get a bit more space, so I can minimize the properties pane, and I'm going to expand the tables folder so that we can see all the tables that we have in this data model. So we need to go to the advanced scripting where we are going to write the C# code, and let's zoom in a little bit so that we do not strain our eyes. And the first thing that we are going to do is create a for each loop. So I'm going to write for each, and then I'm going to declare a variable of type table. So I can write table, then t in model dot tables, and then I'm going to close the for each loop. So in here, the tables is actually the collection which contains, or you can say which represents all the tables in the data model, and the model is the top level object, which is the model that I have in my Power BI file. And then I'm declaring a variable which is of table type, that is basically going to be each table in this data model. And what we can do next is open curly brackets, which is the syntax of C# code, and I'm going to close it as well. And what we are going to do is loop over each table in that tables collection, and then we are going to retrieve all the measures in the given table, and then we are going to extract the output or the content of those measures. So before moving ahead and writing the code that is going to iterate over all the measures in this data model, what we can do is first of all visualize all the tables that are available inside that loop. And for that, what we can do is create a new variable that is going to be above the for each loop. So I'm going to write string result is equal to empty string, and then I'm going to write semicolon that will actually terminate that line of code. And what I'm going to do is simply here I'm going to write result is equal to t dot name, and that's it. And if I click on the run option, it gives me an error because I also need to write a semicolon here as well that will terminate that statement. So if I click on the play button, you can see that the code has been executed. As you can see on the bottom right hand side, it says script executed successfully, but we do not see the result of the name of the table. So for that, what we can do is after the for each loop, we can write result dot output and then open the bracket and close it, because it is a method. That's why we need to write opening and the closing bracket. And after that, we are going to write the semicolon. And if I press F5 or just simply click on this button, you will notice that we get a dialog box which shows us the name of the table, which is colors. And you can see that the colors is the last table in the tables object in the DOM. So why are we not seeing all the names of all the tables? The reason is that we are not actually storing the result to be equal to itself. So each time the for each loop iterates over all the tables in this data model, result is getting set equal to the name of the table. So first time result is equal to products, then it becomes dates, then it becomes product category, and only at the end it becomes color. And since we are not storing the content of the result in each subsequent loop in result itself, we are only going to see the name of the last table in the data model. And to fix this, what we can do is simply write result is equal to result plus t dot name. And if I click on play button, you can see that now I get products, dates, product category, subcategory, sales, all the tables in my data model. So let's click on close. And you can see that the result, the output that we got was not nicely formatted. And in case if we want to add a new line, what we can do is simply go and declare another variable. So I'm going to write string new line is equal to open the double quotes and close it as well. And I'm going to write \r and \n, and that will simply add a new line wherever I'm going to call it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write t.name plus new line. And if I click on green button once again, and I also need to write the semicolon, I always forget that. So let's hit the play button, and you can see that now the output of that result variable is nicely formatted. We get each table name in each different line. So we have products, date, products category. So now that we know what this for each loop is actually doing, what we can do is nest another for each loop so that this time we can iterate over a given measure in a given table. So let's see how we can do that. So let's move ahead and let's close this window, and I'm going to initiate another for each loop inside the top level for each loop. So let's write for each, and then I'm going to declare another variable of type measure. I'm going to write measure m in t dot measures, and let's close the for each loop and introduce the curly brackets. And I'm going to copy or maybe cut the result line and paste it inside the innermost for each loop. And this time what I'm going to do is let's remove everything, and what I'm going to write is m dot DAX object name. So let's click on run and see what it is actually storing. So if I press this button, you can see that I get measure 3. So that must be the last measure in my model in any table. So let's click on close, and instead of just showing a single measure, what we can do is simply concatenate the result variable to itself and then click on play, and you can see that now I get all the measures that I have in this data model. And to make it nicely formatted, what I can do is simply tag the new line variable, and then I can press once again. So you can see that I get a list of all the measures that are there in any table in this data model. So let's click on close. So with the help of DAX object name, you can actually get the name of the measure, but how can we get the expression that is there inside that measure? And for that, what we can do is simply replace that with the expression, and let's press the play button, and you can see that we get output that contains all the DAX code of all the measures that the innermost and the outermost for each loop are actually iterating. So let's click on close, and you might have noticed that the code that we have executed is not nicely formatted because it is not possible to differentiate between the first measure, the second measure, and the third measure. And for that, what we can do is tag along a few more new line character. So I can write plus new line, and if I press F5 once again, this time we get a new line after the each measure, after the code of each measure, and this time it is much easier to differentiate between one measure from another. So let's click on close, and now what we can do is simply save the output that we're getting from the two for each loop that we have written in a text file. And for that, what we can do is write another line of code, and I'm going to copy that code from my notepad so that I don't have to write it on the screen. So I'm going to copy and paste it here. So basically the code is just the save file operator or the method, and you just need to pass the path on which you want to save the output, and also tag the name of the file that will be available for the file that you are going to create. And then in the second argument, all you need to write is result.toString as a method. And if we simply comment out the second last line, and if I click on play button, I get an error. So first of all, I need to write the semicolon. So let's write that. And if I press F5 or the play button and go to desktop, you can see that I get a text file. And if I open that, in this file, I have the code of all the measures that are there in my data model. So I can scroll down and read the DAX code that I have already written in those measures. So right now you might have already figured out one problem, that we are not actually exporting the name of the measure. So if I go to the top, by reading the code, you cannot tell which part or which measure this code actually belongs to and which measure this second code actually belongs to. And in the next part of the code that we are going to write, we are going to identify how we can concatenate the name of the measure in which this DAX code resides. So let's go back to Tabular Editor. And what we are going to do is simply concatenate the name of the measure, but I also want to do it in a nicely formatted way. So for that, I'm going to use a certain kind of delimiter that will help the user in understanding where a certain measure starts and where another measure starts. So for that, what we can do is simply create another variable. So I'm going to name it as measure separator, and that will be basically equal to sign written multiple times. So let's close that and write semicolon, and I'm going to get rid of the expression that we have already written. So we are going to start from scratch. So first thing that I'm going to do is simply write result is equal to result plus the measure separator plus the new line, and then I'm going to write m dot DAX object name. So let's uncomment the output line and let's comment the save file line for a moment, and then I'm going to execute this code. So let's write the semicolon as well. So let's execute it now, and you can see that for each measure we are actually concatenating this equal to after the name, and let's click on close. And what we can do is that we can write plus new line once again, and then I'm going to write the measure separator once again. So I will show you what it is actually going to do in a second. So we can again tag the new line character, and let's hit F5 and we get an error. So let's make sure it is spelled properly. So if I press F5, you can see that this time the name of the measure is split by the equal to sign, and it is also contained between two rows of the equal to sign, and that will look much pretty when we are going to extract that in a text file. So let's click on close, and in the next line I'm going to continue writing my code, and this time I'm going to concatenate the code of the DAX that I have inside the given measure. So I'm going to write result is equal to result plus m dot expression plus new line. Let's try that once again, plus new line, and then again a new line, so that it is nicely formatted. And if I click on play, you can see that, let me just expand it. So first we get the name of the measure, and then we get the code, then we get the name of the measure, and then we get the code, and then same thing is repeated again and again. So let's click on close, and I'm going to comment the output part and uncomment the save file part, and before running the code I'm going to close the text file, and then let's click on run. Let's go back to desktop, and if I open the file, you can see that this time I can easily find out which code belongs to which measure, and you can scroll down and see that the same property or the formatting has been applied to all the measures and all the code. So in case if you want to add the name of the table with a similar separator or maybe a different separator, what you can do is simply go back to Tabular Writer, and then we can create another separator. So I'm going to write string table separator, and that is an optional part. You can simply skip that if you do not want to do. I'm just going to show you how that is possible. So I'm going to copy the code from my different screen. I'm going to paste it here. So this one is going to be our table separator. So let's write semicolon, and then what we are going to do is, before we start the code of the for each loop that iterates over the measures collection, what we are going to write is result is equal to result plus table separator, and then we are going to add a new line, then we are going to write the t dot name, which is the name of the table, and then we are also going to concatenate the table separator once again, and then we are going to write another new line and then a semicolon. So that will basically concatenate this part of the string with the name of the table with the result variable that we have here. So we will get the name of the table, the separator, then we get the name of the measure, the separator, and then we get the code of the DAX expression. But the problem here is that for each loop is actually iterating over each table. So here we have not written any logic that checks that the name of the table and the separator should be tagged only when the table actually contains a measure. So for that, what we can do is initiate an if statement. So we can write if t dot measures dot count is greater than 0, then only concatenate or do this part of the code. So we can write another curly bracket here, and I'm going to indent that so that it is much easier to read. And let's check the output first of all before saving it to the file. So if I click on play, you can see that I get my dates table with the delimiter, and then we get the name of the measure that is encapsulated inside the equal to, and then we get the code of our measure. So let's click on close, and I'm going to comment out the output part and then click uncomment the save file option. Let's close the text file that we have already opened, and let's click on play and see if that is working or not. So let's go to desktop, and I'm going to open my text file, and you can see that I get my delimiter with my dates table name, the name of the dates table. Then I have the name of the measure encapsulated inside the equal to sign. Then I get the code of the DAX expression, and then the name of the table is only repeated when it actually changes or it actually contains the at least one measure. So you can see that we won't see the date table name or the report measures name again anywhere after the first time it actually appears inside the text file. So you can see that we are not able to see it anywhere. So let's close that, and let's go back to Tabular Writer. And before we wrap up this video, you might have noticed that the delimiter for the table name was not getting tagged or concatenated correctly. So if I open the file again, you can see that we get the delimiter and then we get the name of the table, but the second delimiter is also getting concatenated in the same line. So let's see how we can fix that. So let's close this file. Let's go back to Tabular Editor, and all we need to do is simply after the name of the table, we need to write the new line character. So I'm going to copy and paste it here, and let's write plus once again. And if I execute this code, and I'm getting an error, so let's remove the additional plus sign. If I execute it once again and go back to desktop, and if I open this file, now you can see that that formatting has been corrected and the delimiter is getting concatenated correctly. So once you have created a script that is going to perform a certain action, what you can do is, instead of writing that code again and again for each project, you can simply save that code as a custom action inside Tabular Writer. So you can simply click on this green button, and then it will open a new option for you where you can provide the name of the custom action as well as a tooltip, and then you can check the option that best suits for with the C# code that you have written, and then you can simply click on OK, and it will get saved as a custom action. And that was all for this video on how you can export the DAX measures from your tabular model to a text file by using either the DAX Studio or Tabular Writer. And that was all for this video, and I will see you in the next one.